Welcome to Ethanol Producer Magazine podcast. I am your host, Katie Schroeder. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Tom Buis, CEO of the American Carbon Alliance, about the state of carbon capture and sequestration pipeline projects in the Midwest. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Oh, thanks, Katie. It's great to be here. Certainly, always love the opportunity to talk about some really exciting new potential for America's farmers, America's rural economy, America, period.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to set the stage, could you explain what the regulatory and legal landscape for CO2 pipelines kind of looks like across the Midwest?
Sure. Well, you have two components. You have those who are in the part of the country where you don't have the geological formation where you can store the carbon on site. And that's the vast majority of the ethanol plants. You have to get to, on the eastern side, to Illinois before you get into the rock formations, et cetera, where you can store it in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, those areas. And then to the west, you have to get up into North Dakota or Wyoming. But all the plants in between, you're going to have to pipe it or transport it in some manner. And pipelines are the most efficient and the safest way to transport carbon or about any type of fuel. You don't want it out there in a bunch of trucks or railroads where you do have a lot of safety issues. The two components are moving a little bit different tracks. On those areas of the country where you can put it on site, most of those are regulated by the federal government, and through EPA, you need a Class 6 permit. There are a couple of states, North Dakota being one, where you have state primacy, and they can make the determination in the approval process, and they have in North Dakota to be able to store it. And the pipelines, or those who are not in those geological formations, those approvals are basically based on states. Each state has its own set of rules. There's no federal approval, it's state approval. And for example, in the case of the Summit Pipeline, the approval has been granted in North Dakota, both for the pipeline and for the site location to store the carbon. A short line pipeline was granted in Minnesota, and the first route was granted for approval in Iowa. There's a second one pending in Iowa that they're going through the process right now. And then in South Dakota, kind of the one that is really the most disappointing, they rejected the pipeline a couple of different times. And so then you go to Nebraska, and Nebraska has approved one pipeline, the Tallgrass Pipeline, and that started, actually got up and running last October. And there still hasn't taken into consideration whatever Summit decides to do through Nebraska.
Yeah. Have you seen the regulatory and legal landscape kind of shift across the Midwest recently over the last few months and years?
Yeah, the whole issue kind of got bogged down in a bunch of rhetoric and not necessarily facts, but based on fears, what carbon is and what it can do and what it does to the local community, et cetera. And a lot of the decisions early on and a lot of the rhetoric early on was concerned about safety. Well, that's all been disputed. We're now seeing a lot more people understand really the real controversy now is probably more about landowners' rights versus, putting a pipeline in. And in that case, I think the momentum has shifted. In Iowa, for example, in the state Senate, which was a controversial issue last year that the governor had to veto. Now you're seeing some positive legislation being proposed to help address both the landowner rights, but also the rights of the companies to be able to establish a route through that state.
And I saw that the Supreme Court rejected a case from Iowa, and I believe it was maybe a challenge to that law that came through. I'm curious, what does that decision to not take up that Iowa case signal, if anything, for future project development in the Midwest?
Well, I think it's what the proponents have been saying all along is what some of these counties were trying to do was not legal. And, if you had, well, let's just take the case in South Dakota, you had 5 different counties with 5 different requirements, and they were all added after Summit had proposed the pipeline. Well, the game kept changing, and you started to see that in Iowa with some challenges by some of the counties, and so rightfully it was challenged legally, and I think all the proponents felt all along that they were on solid legal ground, and with the United States Supreme Court refusing to overturn the lower courts, that removes one big hurdle, in my opinion.
It sounds like from your description of all these different states and all of their different kind of methods for approving these pipelines and the pathways and the routes and all of this, that there's not a lot of consistency. And I'm curious, how does regional consistency or the lack thereof impact these multi-state pipeline projects? We saw the Navigator one kind of get wiped off the board a while ago, and I'm curious, how does this impact both Summit and any other pipeline projects that are kind of in the works less publicly moving forward, to not have this regional consistency?
It makes it very, very difficult and very expensive for anyone trying to build one. And when you have 5 different states, and then you have counties within those states all requiring different requirements, it really delays the process. I mean, really, the Summit Pipeline's been a proposal out there for 5 years, and addressing all these, in many cases, false narratives that become roadblocks to get around. And what it really begs the question for, Katie, is treat carbon pipelines the same as natural gas pipelines, which natural gas pipelines are federally regulated by FERC. And so that's a much easier process, a better process, a more consistent process to be able to move forward. And ultimately, that's probably the best solution. And there is legislation that's starting to move through Congress in a bipartisan manner to allow federal permitting reform. And, it'd be very, very welcome.
Yeah, yeah. In your opinion, do you think that legislation has a good chance of passing, or is that something that there might be some strong opposition, you think, from some members of Congress?
Well, when you're dealing with Congress, it's pretty impossible to project what they're going to do or not do, especially this where the margins are so small. You can see 1 or 2 members of either party can kind of derail anything getting done. So it's very, very difficult. It's not impossible, but we'll keep our fingers crossed and keep pushing for it. The federal permitting reform, but you also have other related issues, Katie, and that's the extension of the number of years for the 45Z tax credit. That's really important because these projects that people are wanting to do at their sites are very, very expensive. And you need more than a couple of years worth of tax credits to be able to attract the investment necessary to move forward. So there is legislation, bipartisan legislation in Congress, bipartisan bicameral legislation, both House and Senate, to extend the 45Z tax credit, and also to restore the credit to where it was before the stimulus package that passed a few months ago, which actually lowered the amount of credit available for ethanol plants capturing the carbon, and also any utilization plants like sustainable aviation fuel. You need that differentiation, otherwise ethanol couldn't qualify on alcohol to jet, et cetera. Those are important as well.
Yeah, I'm curious, is there any good news or positive things happening for CCS pipelines, whether it's with policymakers, regulators, farmers, and industry being aligned successfully to move any of these projects forward?
A lot of positivity, and we're starting to see really kind of getting up over the hump. The tallgrass pipeline in Nebraska is very positive. Um, and what happens in the tallgrass pipeline is it goes from Nebraska out to Wyoming where it's stored. And what you're seeing already is those ethanol plants that are on there are seeing a very, very, very robust, healthy premium for their capturing carbon. And what you have to keep in mind in all of this, Katie, is out of that kernel of corn, a third of it is starch. That's what you make ethanol out of. Another third of it is the proteins and the oils and the fats, which is the animal feed component of it. And in the final third is the CO2. And that's not monetized. So if you get a process where an ethanol plant can monetize that other third of that kernel of corn, that restores profitability, not just to the ethanol plant, but it passes through to the farmer in higher prices for their corn. It helps build a tax base in that rural community. And so with tallgrass, I think that serves a couple of purposes, not just to help those plants that are on it, but it sends a message that this isn't some made up concept that doesn't work. It's a real market. There's a real market out there for this stuff. And whether you use it for restoring the carbon in permanently or you use it for oil recovery, like in North Dakota, I've been told that there's about $1 trillion worth of trapped oil that it's going to take stuff like carbon to help pull it up out of those wells. Or if you're looking on down the road, the utilization for sustainable aviation fuel, which is a 50 billion gallon a year market, or even renewable chemical production. That chemical production doesn't use renewable feedstocks, et cetera. So all that can be done. The utilization, and while you and I are talking, there are probably people out there creating even more ideas on how you can do
Yeah.
it, build markets.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. There's so many innovators out there, and it's always exciting to see the new technologies and products that are coming onto the market. It feels like every few months lately. And I'm curious on the side of talking about challenges or hurdles that have yet to be leaped. What challenges still exist for the CO2 pipeline development, particularly around permitting, public perception, and regulatory uncertainty?
Well, I think the biggest hurdles are still the approval process in the remaining locations. And I think we're all working through that. Like I mentioned before, North Dakota approved it, Minnesota's approved it, Iowa's approved it once, Nebraska's approved the tall grass, and probably will be facing the summit request soon. So I think there's a tremendous excitement about moving forward in that front, but it is a challenge. It's always a challenge. The opponents come out there and, they all show up at the hearings and they're very vocal. It's not necessarily based on facts, it's based on fear. And, when you look at CO2, it doesn't explode. I mean, matter of fact, you use it in your fire extinguishers, and it's not near as dangerous as other type of pipelines. Yet they all try to portray that it is, and that's just not based on facts. So that's still a challenge. But that public perception is important. And that's what we try to work on at ACA all the time. I know that others, corn growers, the ethanol groups, sustainable aviation fuel industry, everyone's out there trying to uh, make this debate about the real facts. And I have to tell you, Katie, I grew up on a farm in Indiana. I farmed for 30 years before going to Washington to help a friend during the farm crisis, and spent 30 years there. And the at the time, we were in a severe farm crisis. We're losing their farms right and left. And it was all because of market conditions. We had more supply than we had demand. We're in that situation now. Every farmer increases their yield almost every year. That yield productivity just continues to grow. Every ethanol plant's yield productivity continues to grow. And the demand has to grow with it. And that's the missing component now. In the 80s and 90s and O's, what turned it around was the advent of the ethanol industry, create new demand. We were producing, 4, 5, 6 billion bushels of corn then. Today we're producing 15, 16, 17 billion bushels. We have to have that new demand. And that's what all of this does. I tell people there's probably never been a more exciting time for the future as now.
And it was really eye-opening to me on the side of increased productivity, like that all of this yield is coming on less acres too. So it's even lower CI corn than it has been in the past. So it's wild to think how much more potential there is for those crops to continue to grow. And I guess as kind of one of the final questions here, and on the note of what you were just speaking about, how do you see carbon capture expanding market opportunities for ethanol producers and corn growers in the Midwest?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's creating this new demand, and new demand is necessary for everyone to be able to move forward. In the case of farmers right now, they're probably losing $1 a bushel for every bushel they produce. That makes a real financial crunch on their operations. The ethanol industry is kind of tapped out on growth. We haven't seen the expansion that everybody thought we were going to get. We keep hoping for it, but we're going to have it. And in order to do so, we're going to have to do new things. And carbon capture and other utilizations for that carbon are so important to our future. And the thing to keep in mind is when we built out the ethanol industry, we were trying to take market share from people that didn't want to give up the market share, like the oil industry, right? They don't every ounce of ethanol that goes into the market reduced the amount of oil-based petroleum products, and they didn't like that. What we're looking at here in the development of sustainable aviation fuel and oil recovery, capturing the carbon, is totally new market. It's not controlled by anyone. This is America's opportunity to grab that. We got competition that wants to compete, Brazil, Argentina, China, and if we don't do it, they will. It's a real market. We just got to go get it, Katie, and we can. This, like I said, this is the most exciting stuff that's come along in 30 years.
Thanks for sharing that, Tom. And I think kind of as a last question, if there's one takeaway you want to share with any ethanol producers who happen to tune in, what would it be?
Weigh in on based on your own interests and what this means to you and your future as a farmer, as an ethanol producer, as a local government official, as someone that lives in a rural community. One of the positive things that occurred when the ethanol industry started to advance was you saw those rural communities where the ethanol plant is located become vibrant. Most rural communities were drying up and going away, but it created jobs, and those jobs kept young people like yourself coming back to rural America, and that can happen again. The advantages of this are just tremendous. And so everyone should weigh in. Everyone who's got a stake in it should weigh in with the policymakers, with the regulators, with their federal or state policymakers, and talk about how important this is to their future.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Tom, and thank you for sharing your insights with us. And also thank you to our listeners for joining us on Ethanol Producer Magazine podcast. Check out ethanolproducer.com for more industry insights and ethanol-related news.